The piercing wail of emergency sirens shattered the peaceful morning at the Galactic Federation Academy. Cadet Jack Cooper's head snapped up from his quantum mechanics textbook, eyes scanning the crystalline dome of the library ceiling, just as a massive shadow darkened the room. The legendary Arcaxian warship, Eternal Dawn, screamed past overhead, its iridescent hull trailing clouds of plasma and debris. "Holy shit," Jack muttered, earning a scandalized chirp from the Vincidian librarian. But he was already moving, his Deathworlder muscles carrying him to the window faster than his alien classmates could react. Years of working on broken-down colony ships with his dad had taught him to recognize the sound of failing engines, and what he heard now sent chills down his spine. The Eternal Dawn was no ordinary vessel. Even from his basic xenohistory classes, Jack knew it represented the pinnacle of Arcaxian engineering, a masterpiece that had taken 3 centuries to design and construct. Its quantum crystalline hull alone had required 50 years of continuous growth in zero-gravity chambers, guided by the most skilled crystal shapers in the galaxy. And now it was about to crash right into the Academy's parade grounds. "Clear the area," Jack's voice boomed across the library, startling several studying Mithridian cadets into releasing their trademark defense ink. "That ship's losing altitude control. The impact radius will be at least half a kilometer." While other cadets panicked or froze, Jack's mind was already racing through calculations. The ship's descent angle, the visible plasma venting from its starboard nacelles, the distinctive harmonic screech of its failing gravitational compensators. It all painted a picture that most of his alien classmates couldn't see. Where they saw impending disaster, he saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. By the sacred crystalline matrices, an Arcaxian official burst through the library doors, his iridescent scales flashing patterns of distress. "The Eternal Dawn systems are cascading. Our greatest achievement, about to." The impact cut him off. The massive warship slammed into the parade grounds with enough force to shatter every window within a mile radius. Jack had already tackled 2 smaller alien cadets behind a sturdy desk, shielding them from the spray of crystal shards. The crash sent shockwaves through the Academy's foundations, but Jack's focus never wavered. He was already noting the way the ship's hull had crumpled, how its emergency fields had flickered and failed, the precise pattern of debris distribution. As the dust began to settle, Jack emerged from cover, brushing crystalline fragments from his regulation uniform. Around him, alien cadets were still cowering or calling for their respective deities, but his eyes were fixed on the crashed vessel. Through the settling debris cloud, he could see something that made his heart race. The power core was still active, but its resonance was all wrong. "Son of a bitch," he whispered, recognition dawning. The fluctuation pattern in the ship's quantum matrix, visible through the newly formed cracks in its hull, looked exactly like the fusion reactor problems he'd helped his father solve back on their colony world. Different technology, same fundamental issue. Emergency response teams were already converging on the crash site, their hover vehicles casting prismatic lights through the dust cloud. Among them, Jack spotted the distinctive silhouettes of high-ranking Arcaxian officials, their ceremonial robes billowing as they rushed toward their fallen treasure. Jack's fingers twitched toward the multi-tool he always kept in his boot, a habit his alien classmates had often mocked as primitive. But as he watched the increasing chaos around the crash site, a grin slowly spread across his face. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways, and he had a feeling the next 30 minutes were about to prove exactly why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's ultimate problem solvers. The parade grounds had transformed into a scene of barely contained chaos. Diplomatic tensions crackled through the air like static electricity as Jack shouldered his way through the growing crowd of spectators. He could hear the Arcaxian ambassador's translator device struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire bursts of crystalline language. Absolutely unacceptable. The Eternal Dawn carries quantum-encrypted peace treaties vital to today's Centaurian border negotiations. The ambassador's bioluminescent patches flashed angry patterns of red and gold. Without these documents at the Federation Council within the next 53 minutes, the Drachnid Empire will take our absence as a slight and withdraw from the Accords. Jack's ears perked up at that. The Drachnid Empire was notorious for their hair-triggered diplomatic responses. He'd learned that much from his strategic relations classes. A withdrawn peace treaty now could mean war by dinner time. The ship's chief engineer, a towering insectoid named Falafuk, clicked his mandibles in obvious distress. Even if we bypassed the sacred initialization sequences, which is strictly forbidden by the Articles of Engineering Faith, the quantum crystalline matrices require a minimum of 3 standard cycles to properly align. We're looking at weeks of repairs. Excellence. Jack edged closer, studying the damage. The ship's outer hull sparkled with microfractures, but the real problem was deeper. Through the crystalline structure, he could see pulses of energy moving in chaotic patterns, exactly like the time his dad's jury-rigged fusion reactor had thrown a fit during the colony's winter storm. The articles are clear, another Arcaxian engineer chimed in, her scales shifting to formal patterns of resignation. Any interference with the blessed systems without proper ceremonial preparation would be sacrilege of the highest order. The quantum harmonics must be respected, or, respectfully, a Federation admiral cut in, his forearms gesturing in obvious frustration. Your religious observations might just start an interstellar war. Surely there's some provision for emergency circumstances. Jack's mind was only half on the argument. He was watching the power fluctuations through the ship's translucent hull, mentally mapping the energy flows. The Arcaxians had built redundancy upon redundancy, layer after layer of safety systems, each one more complex than the last. But sometimes, too many safety features became their own kind of danger. Look at how they're fighting each other, he muttered, earning strange looks from nearby aliens. The backup systems were creating cascade failures, each one trying to compensate for the others in an endless loop. It was like watching 15 drivers try to parallel park the same car. A high-pitched whine caught his attention. Through a crack in the hull, he spotted something that made his heart skip. The primary power core's resonance was starting to harmonize with the backup systems. If nobody acted fast, all that lovely redundancy was about to turn into one massive feedback loop. The Arcaxian ambassador was still arguing with Federation officials when Jack saw the power core's glow shift from blue to purple. His dad's voice echoed in his memory. Son, when reactor light goes purple, you've got about 2 minutes to either fix it or start running. Without thinking about consequences or protocol, Jack stepped forward. Your Excellence, he called out, making every alien head turn his way. That power core is about to go critical. The ambassador's translator crackled. And what would a human cadet know of our sacred technology? I know those energy patterns. Jack pointed to the visible fluctuations. They're identical to a knocked-out fusion core. Your backup systems are fighting each other like cats in a sack. The chief engineer's antennae twitched violently. You dare compare our quantum crystalline masterwork to your primitive fusion technology? I dare because I'm right. Jack met the insectoid's compound eyes steadily. And I can fix it in 30 minutes. The parade grounds fell silent except for the ominous whine of the power core, which was now edging toward a deep violet. The ambassador's scales shifted through a complex series of colors before settling on a pattern Jack had never seen before. And if you fail? Jack shrugged, already reaching for his boot where his multi-tool waited. Then you can court-martial me for whatever you want. But right now, we're running out of time to save your ship and your treaty. The silence following Jack's offer lasted precisely 3 seconds before chaos erupted. A dozen Arcaxian voices chattered in crystalline tones, while their bioluminescent patches strobed in patterns of shock and outrage. The chief engineer's mandibles clattered so fast they practically hummed. Impossible. Valthuk's translator squealed. The quantum harmonization alone requires 17 separate blessing ceremonies. That core goes critical in about 90 seconds. Jack interrupted, already moving toward the ship. You can either let me help, or we can all find out if your evacuation ceremonies are faster than a quantum detonation." The ambassador's scales rippled with conflicting colors. "You understand, Cadet Cooper, that the Eternal Dawn represents 3 centuries of our finest engineering. Its systems are so complex that they're actually fighting themselves right now," Jack finished, pointing to where the power fluctuations had turned a dangerous shade of magenta. "Sometimes the most complex solution isn't the best one. Back home, we call that over-engineering." A collective gasp rose from the Arcaxian engineers. One of the younger ones actually swooned, their anti-grav belt barely catching them before they hit the ground. "Over." The chief engineer's translator crackled with static, as if the very word was too horrible to process. "Over-engineering." Jack reached the ship's main access point, noting how the crystalline structure pulsed with increasingly erratic patterns. "Look, my dad and I kept an entire colony alive for 3 years with duct tape and paper clips. Sometimes you need fancy quantum algorithms, and sometimes you just need to know which wire to pull." He pulled out his multi-tool, a birthday gift from his father that had seen him through countless repairs. The Arcaxians recoiled at the sight of its decidedly non-ceremonial appearance. "You would touch our sacred vessel with that primitive implement." The ambassador's scales had settled into a uniform shade of horror gray. "Either this primitive implement touches your ship, or we all get a really close look at what a quantum core detonation does to property values." Jack flipped the tool open, its various attachments gleaming in the purple light now emanating from the ship's wombs. 30 minutes. That's all I need." The core's whine reached a pitch that made several nearby aliens cover their auditory organs. Jack could feel the vibrations in his teeth, another bad sign he recognized from experience. 29 minutes now, actually. A Federation admiral stepped forward. "Ambassador, we don't have time for—" The explosion of a secondary power conduit cut him off, showering the area with crystalline fragments. Jack instinctively threw himself between the blast and the nearest officials, his heavy worlder muscles easily absorbing the impact of the debris. When he straightened, his cadet uniform was scorched, but his grin remained firmly in place. 28 minutes. But hey, no pressure. The ambassador's scales cycled through every color Jack had ever seen before settling into the deep blue of resignation. "The consequences of failure will be pretty obvious to everyone within a 5-kilometer radius," Jack finished. He was already examining the access panel's crystal lattice structure, his mind mapping out the quickest path to the core. "So how about we skip the part where you list all the ways this could go wrong, and you just let me do what humans do best?" "And what is that?" Valthuk asked, mandibles twitching nervously. Jack's fingers found the exact resonance point he was looking for in the crystal matrix. "We fix things, usually by breaking all the rules about how they're supposed to be fixed." With a decisive click, he activated his multi-tool's sonic probe attachment. The crystalline access panel responded with a harmonious hum that made every Arcaxian engineer present vibrate in sympathetic resonance. "Now," Jack said, as the panel began to realign its molecular structure, "who wants to learn how we solve problems on the colony worlds?" The power core's whine shifted to a dangerous growl. 27 minutes, he added cheerfully. Tick-tock. Inside the Eternal Dawn, Jack moved with practiced efficiency, his boots ringing against the crystalline deck plates. Behind him, a procession of horrified Arcaxian engineers followed, their scales flickering between shades of anxiety and outrage as he bypassed door after door without performing the proper activation rituals. Those seals require a 12-step authentication sequence. Valthuk's translator squeaked as Jack pressed his multi-tool against another junction, the crystal responding instantly to the precisely calibrated sonic frequencies. "Funny thing about crystalline structures," Jack replied, not slowing his pace. "They all have resonance frequencies. Hit the right note and—" The door chimed and slid open. "They sing like a choir." The ship's interior was a maze of intersecting crystal lattices, each one pulsing with quantum energy that flowed like liquid light through the transparent pathways. Under normal circumstances, Jack would have stopped to admire the artistry. Right now, all he saw was a system in crisis. "There's your problem," he muttered, reaching the central engineering hub. "You've got 15 different systems all trying to be in charge." The main control room was a cathedral of crystal, with holographic displays floating at various levels and power conduits spanning the chamber like frozen lightning. At its heart, the quantum core pulsed an angry violet, its harmonics setting Jack's teeth on edge. A junior engineer nervously chittered. "Each backup system is essential. The articles of engineering faith demand redundancy in all critical." "Look." Jack pointed to where the energy flows were visibly fighting each other. "See how the tertiary backup is trying to compensate for the secondary, but the quaternary system thinks that's a malfunction, so it's fighting both. You've got the equivalent of 15 captains trying to steer one ship." He pulled up a holographic diagnostic display, his fingers dancing through the crystal light interface. The Arcaxians gasped as he bypassed several sacred access protocols with simple geometric pattern completions. "The entire system is based on the harmony of spheres," Valthuk protested. "Each layer must maintain perfect balance with." "Except they're not in harmony," Jack interrupted, his mind racing as the picture became clearer. "They're in competition. It's like..." He searched for an analogy they might understand. "It's like having 15 crystal shapers all trying to grow one crystal, each thinking the others are making mistakes." The comparison hit home. Several engineers' scales shifted to thoughtful shades of blue-green. Jack traced a power flow pathway with his finger. "Look here. When the crash damaged the primary systems, every backup kicked in simultaneously. But instead of working together, they're all fighting to be the primary system. You've got so many fail-safes that they're actually causing the failure." The core's whine shifted pitch again, making everyone flinch. 22 minutes, Jack announced, already pulling tools from his belt. "Time to simplify." Simplify. The word seemed to cause physical pain to the chief engineer, but the complexity is what makes it perfect. Each system was designed by our finest minds over generations. Jack was already removing panels, exposing the crystal matrices beneath. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most complex one. My dad taught me that the day we fixed our colony's atmospheric processor with parts from an old coffee maker. He paused, seeing something that made him laugh out loud. The Arcaxians jumped at the sudden sound. "Well, would you look at that," he said, pointing to a particular crystal formation. "Your quantum regulator matrix. It's essentially a really fancy throttle control. You've got 300 years of engineering wrapped around something that basically does the same job as a motorcycle's gas handle." The engineers crowded around, their compound eyes reflecting the shifting crystal patterns. "Impossible," one whispered. "The quantum crystalline harmonic resonance calibrator is the most sophisticated." "It's a throttle," Jack repeated firmly. "A beautiful, incredibly complex throttle that's currently stuck wide open because all your backup systems are fighting over who gets to close it." He rolled up his sleeves, grinning as he reached for a particular attachment on his multi-tool. "Now, who wants to see how we fixed stuck throttles back on the colony world?" The horrified expressions on the Arcaxian faces suggested that perhaps they didn't want to know, but with 19 minutes left on the clock, they were out of alternatives. "This is barbaric," shrieked an Arcaxian engineer as Jack began dismantling the quantum regulator's protective housing. His multi-tool hummed at precisely calculated frequencies, causing the crystal matrices to separate along their natural fault lines. "Barbaric would be letting this ship explode because we're too worried about proper procedures," Jack replied, not looking up from his work. 17 minutes until critical failure, by the way. He worked with focused intensity, his hands moving with the assured confidence that came from years of jury-rigging solutions on colony worlds, where spare parts were a luxury and survival didn't wait for proper protocols. The Arcaxians watched in horror as he bypassed system after system, manually overriding fail-safes that had taken decades to design. But the harmonic resonance patterns, Valthuk began, are fighting each other like cats in a bag, Jack finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his emergency ration bar. The Arcaxians stared in confusion as he unwrapped it. "What are you doing with that primitive sustenance cube?" Jack carefully broke off a piece of the dense protein bar. "The synthetic proteins in these things have almost the same density as your crystal matrices. And I need..." He wedged the piece precisely between two vibrating crystal formations, immediately damping their destructive resonance. "A shim. You're using food as a repair component." The ambassador's scales had turned a previously unseen shade of green-gray. "You should see what we can do with chewing gum." Jack grinned, already moving to the next problem. He spotted a series of quantum circuits running in parallel, all trying to regulate the same power flow. "See, here's your real issue. You've got 15 different systems that all think they're in charge." His hands moved faster than the Arcaxians could follow, disconnecting redundant systems and rerouting power flows. To their growing horror, he began humming Sweet Home Alabama as he worked, explaining that it helped him keep rhythm. The sacred harmonics require perfect silence during. An engineer started to protest. 13 minutes, Jack cut him off, "Not breaking rhythm. And your sacred harmonics are what got us into this mess. Sometimes you need to get a little unsacred to get things done." He reached a junction where 3 different emergency systems were locked in a feedback loop. With a quick twist of his multi-tool, he bypassed all 3, rerouting the power through a much simpler path. "That's impossible." Valthuk's mandibles clattered in distress. "The quantum flow requires the stabilizing influence off." The power flow stabilized immediately. "All 3 emergency systems," the chief engineer finished weakly. Jack was already moving to the core itself, where the angry violet light had started to pulse in a dangerous rhythm. "You know what your problem is. You've got so many safety features that they've become a hazard. It's like wearing so many seatbelts that you can't reach the steering wheel." He pulled out another piece of his ration bar, this time using it to bridge a gap between 2 crystal matrices that had cracked during the crash. The protein bar's density matched perfectly, creating a temporary bypass that made the Arcaxian scales flash in disbelief. 9 minutes, he announced, now fully immersed in the puzzle before him. "Time to show you why humans are the galaxy's best mechanics." His movements became a blur of efficient motion, where the Arcaxians saw sacred patterns that required careful ritual calibration. Jack saw simple mechanical problems with straightforward solutions. He bypassed ceremonial systems, rerouted power through emergency channels, and essentially hot-wired the ancient vessel using techniques that would be familiar to any human mechanic, but appeared as technological heresy to the aliens. "This is either madness or brilliance," the ambassador observed, watching Jack create a makeshift power regulator using his multi-tool and what appeared to be a spare button from his uniform. Jack's grin widened as he made another adjustment, causing 3 separate warning systems to suddenly fall silent. Funny thing about humans, excellence. Those 2 things tend to be pretty close together. The core's violent light began to soften, its angry whine dropping to a more manageable hum. 5 minutes to spare, Jack announced proudly, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Now, who wants to see if it works?" You can't seriously intend to initiate power-up without the sacred sequence of awakening. Valthuk's translator crackled with static-laden horror as Jack's hand hovered over the main control interface. "The sacred sequence takes 6 hours, Jack replied, fingers dancing across the crystal controls. "We've got about 4 minutes before that peace treaty deadline. Sometimes you've got to skip the warm-up and jump straight to the main event." The entire engineering bay hummed with tension. Dozens of displays showed cascading numbers and shifting quantum patterns that, according to 3 centuries of Arcaxian engineering doctrine, should have been impossible. Jack's repairs had bypassed so many sacred systems that the diagnostic computers had given up trying to track them all. By all known laws of quantum crystalline engineering, this shouldn't work, a junior engineer whispered. their scales shifting through shades of anxiety. The power harmonics are completely unbalanced. Jack cracked his knuckles, a sound that made several Arcaxians flinch. Known laws, sure, but we humans have a saying. Nobody told the laws of physics they were supposed to be impossible. With that, he initiated the power-up sequence. The ship's core flared to life, bathing the engineering bay in a brilliant blue light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, systems began coming online, not in their usual ceremonial order, but in a cascade of activation that sent the monitoring equipment into a frenzy. Impossible. Valthuk's mandibles clattered so fast, they became a blur. The quantum matrices are accepting power without proper harmonic alignment. The feedback should be running at 110% efficiency. Jack finished, pointing to a display. Turns out when you stop 15 different systems from fighting each other, they actually work better. The numbers didn't lie. Power flowed through the ship's systems more smoothly than it had since its construction. The makeshift repairs, the protein bar shims, the bypassed redundancies, the hot-wired control systems were actually improving on 3 centuries of careful engineering. But the ambassador's scales had turned pure white with shock. The sacred articles clearly state that quantum crystalline technology requires perfect resonance between all systems. Jack shrugged, monitoring the readings. Maybe they just needed to resonate with each other a little less formally. Sometimes, you've got to let systems talk things out without all the ceremony getting in the way. A young Arcaxian engineer, who had been studying the power flow patterns with increasing fascination, suddenly emitted a high-pitched keen of distress. Their anti-grav belt activated automatically as they fainted, gently lowering their unconscious form to the deck. Did they just molt? Jack asked, concerned. A natural response to extreme theological distress, Valthuk explained weakly. Your repairs have invalidated at least 16 fundamental principles of quantum engineering. 17, another engineer corrected, their voice faint. The protein bar shim alone contradicts the 3rd sacred theorem of crystalline harmony. Jack was about to respond when a new alert caught his attention. The ship's long-range communications array had automatically activated, another system that should have required hours of ceremonial preparation. Hey, look at that! He pointed to the display. You've got full communications capability. Better get those peace treaties transmitted before. The ambassador was already moving, their ceremonial robes flowing as they rushed to the communication station. Their fingers flew across the crystal controls with practiced precision, initiating the transmission of the quantum-encrypted treaties. Treaties transmitted, they announced moments later. The Drachnid delegation confirms receipt with. Their scales shifted to a shocked purple, with commendations on the unprecedented clarity of the quantum signal. Jack checked the power readings one last time, noting with satisfaction that every system was running well above its design specifications. Nothing like a little human ingenuity to get things running smooth. He patted the nearest crystal panel affectionately, causing several engineers to wince at the casual contact with sacred technology. The panel hummed back harmoniously, almost like a well-tuned engine purring. Now then, Jack said, pulling out his tablet. Who wants me to explain exactly how I broke every rule in your engineering Bible and made your ship run better because of it? Behind him, the sound of another Arcaxian engineer molting suggested that perhaps not everyone was quite ready for that particular lecture. It's really quite simple, Jack said, sketching diagrams on his tablet, while a crowd of shell-shocked Arcaxian engineers huddled around him. The engineering bay of the Eternal Dawn had become an impromptu classroom, with even the ambassador lingering to observe this unprecedented breakdown of their sacred engineering principles. Simple. Valthuk's translator crackled with incredulity. You've violated every established protocol of quantum crystalline engineering. That's because you're thinking in quantum crystalline, Jack replied, adding another line to his diagram. I'm thinking in practical mechanics. Look here, your power distribution system, It's basically just a really fancy version of my dad's old tractor engine. He pulled up a side-by-side comparison, showing the flow patterns of both systems. The Arcaxian's scales shifted through various shades of disbelief as the similarities became apparent. But our system uses quantum entanglement tow. A junior engineer began. To do the same thing a carburetor does, Jack finished. You're using quantum mechanics to mix power and control signals, just like a carburetor mixes fuel and air. You've just wrapped it in 3 centuries of ceremonies and failsafes. The engineer who had molted earlier nervously raised an appendage. But the sacred articles teach us that complexity breeds perfection. Each additional system adds another layer of harmony to the quantum matrices. Jack stood up, walking over to the main power core. Its blue light pulsed steadily now, more stable than it had been since construction. See, that's where humans and Arcaxians think differently. We learned pretty quick on the colony worlds that complexity means more points of failure. Every extra system you add is another thing that can go wrong. He pointed to where his protein bar shim was still maintaining perfect resonance between 2 crystal matrices. Sometimes the simple solution is the best solution. Your quantum harmonics were fighting each other because each system thought it knew best. It's like having 15 backseat drivers all grabbing for the wheel at once. The ambassador's scales shifted to a thoughtful shade of blue. Yet your primitive solutions have somehow improved our ship's efficiency beyond its original specifications. Because now the systems are working together instead of fighting each other. Jack pulled up another diagnostic display. Look at the power flow now. Clean, simple, direct. No ceremonial routing, no redundant checks, just straight path from power source to systems. He switched to a before and after comparison that made several engineers emit distressed chirping sounds. Your original configuration had power flowing through 47 different ceremonial checkpoint systems before reaching its destination. I cut that down to 3 essential validation steps. But the ceremonies ensure proper quantum alignment, Valthuk protested weakly. The ceremonies were getting in the way of the engineering, Jack corrected gently. It's like, imagine trying to drive a car, but before you can turn the wheel, you have to recite a poem, solve a puzzle, and get approval from 3 different committees. A young engineer who had been quietly studying Jack's diagrams suddenly straightened, their scales flashing with excitement. The protein bar shim. It's maintaining perfect resonance because of its molecular density, not because of any quantum properties. Now you're getting it, Jack grinned. Sometimes you don't need a quantum solution to a mechanical problem. Simple physics works just fine. The engineering bay fell silent as this heretical concept sank in. Jack could almost see the centuries of tradition wrestling with the undeniable evidence before them. Perhaps, the ambassador said slowly, their scales showing a complex pattern of revelation mixed with uncertainty. We have something to learn from human engineering philosophy after all. Jack saved his diagrams with a flourish. And maybe we can learn something from your quantum crystalline technology too. That's the real beauty of it. When you stop believing that there's only one right way to do things, you open yourself up to all sorts of possibilities. He patted the nearest crystal panel affectionately. The ship hummed back, its tone somehow warmer than before, as if it too had learned something about the value of simplicity over ceremony. Now, Jack said, pulling up a new diagram, who wants to learn about how duct tape could revolutionize your emergency repair procedures? The sound of a third engineer molting suggested that perhaps the Arcaxians weren't quite ready for that particular revelation just yet. The story of how a human cadet fixed the eternal dawn spread through the Galactic Federation, faster than quantum-encrypted gossip. Within a week, the incident had sparked what galactic news networks were calling the Great Engineering Debate, with traditionalists and reformers across 17 species arguing about the role of ceremony versus practicality in technological development. Jack, meanwhile, found himself suddenly popular in ways that made him distinctly uncomfortable. No, I cannot bless your quantum matrices with a protein bar, he explained for the 3rd time that day to a group of eager young Arcaxian engineers. They had taken to following him around the academy between classes, their scales shifting through enthusiastic shades of orange whenever he performed even the simplest maintenance tasks. The Federation Engineering Council had called an emergency session to discuss the implications of his repairs. The fact that the Eternal Dawn was now operating at 110% efficiency could not be ignored, even by the most staunch traditionalists. It's not just about the efficiency, Jack tried to explain during his testimony. It's about understanding that sometimes the most advanced solution isn't the best solution. Sometimes you need quantum entanglement, and sometimes you just need a really good wrench. His words, much to his horror, were immediately engraved on crystal plaques and mounted in engineering halls across the galaxy. The Arcaxians, to everyone's surprise, embraced the changes with unexpected enthusiasm. Their younger engineers began a movement called practical quantum mechanics, which sought to blend traditional quantum crystalline technology with what they termed Deathworlder ingenuity. Jack's protein bar shim had inspired a whole new field of study in emergency repair materials. Even Valthuk, the once horrified chief engineer, had become an unlikely advocate for change. The sacred articles teach us to seek perfection, he announced during a controversial interview. But perhaps we were so focused on the perfection of complexity that we missed the perfection of simplicity. The ambassador went even further. Under their recommendation, the Arcaxian High Council mandated that all their ships now carry what became known as Cooper boxes, emergency repair kits containing basic tools, spare parts, and, much to Jack's endless amusement, a supply of protein bars. But the real change came 3 months later, when Jack was called to the Academy Commandant's office. He found not just the Commandant, but also the Arcaxian ambassador and a delegation from the Federation Engineering Corps waiting for him. Cadet Cooper, the ambassador's scales showed formal patterns of deep respect. "We would like you to teach." Jack blinked. Teach. The Federation has approved a new course requirement for all engineering cadets, the Commandant explained. "We're calling it practical innovation, the human approach to problem solving." Though some of us wanted to call it how to fix a quantum drive with a protein bar, one of the Federation engineers added with a chittering laugh. The ambassador's scales shifted to a warm gold. "Your repairs to the Eternal Dawn didn't just save a ship, Cadet Cooper. They showed us that there's more than one way to achieve harmony between systems. Sometimes the best traditions are the new ones we create together." Jack thought about his father back on the colony world, fixing atmospheric processors with spare coffee maker parts. Dad always said the best engineer isn't the one with the fanciest tools. He mused, it's the one who can work with whatever they've got. The ambassador's translator hummed with approval. Wisdom comes in many forms, even in protein bar shims. And so, every semester after that, engineering cadets from across the galaxy would gather to learn what became known as the Cooper Principles. Sometimes the simple solution is the best solution. Rules are guidelines, not barriers. And most importantly, always carry a protein bar, because you never know when you'll need to shim a quantum matrix. The Eternal Dawn, still running at 110% efficiency with its jury-rigged repairs, became a testament to these principles. Its quantum core continued to hum in perfect harmony, maintained by a combination of ancient Arcaxian wisdom and human practicality. And of course, one very precisely placed protein bar shim.